Hello, folks. My name is Garvin, and I read things and ramble on about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today, we continue on our spiraling dive into mermaid myths and legends by looking at the mermaids of sub-Saharan Africa. Just quick note, this topic was chosen by my ever-wise patrons, whose ranks you can join for as little as $1 a month. There's a link in the description, and there are polls you can vote on up right now. If you'd rather make a one-time donation or request, there's also a coffee link there. I would also like to note that this is not meant to be a comprehensive or complete look at all the mermaid beliefs and stories present in sub-Saharan Africa. It is a vast continent full of many different peoples, and people have lived in Africa longer than anywhere else in the world. So please forgive me if I've missed a favorite of yours, and feel free to share any mermaid stories or lore from Africa that I don't cover in the comments below. Especially if you have a source that's not listed in the description, I'd be really grateful if you shared that in the comments as well. Thank you in advance. So when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, most of the mermaids I found in my sources fell into roughly two groups, which interestingly enough, do match up with themes we've already discussed in mermaid lore so far. The first group are mermaids as predators of humanity. These creatures are often dangerous shapeshifters with magical powers who may or may not use seductive wiles to lure the unwary to their doom, or just attack anyone who wanders out into dangerous waters where they shouldn't have been in the first place. Another interesting note is how many of these merfolks have snake-like alternate forms or are linked to a snake monster. Although, given how many large snakes of various types live in Africa, in and around the water, that does make a certain amount of sense. The second group is mentors and benefactors of humanities. These are merfolk who share knowledge and empower people, often initiating people into various mysteries and hidden knowledge, as well as teaching people how to heal or preventing diseases. I'll be covering that group in the next video. In this video, we're going to focus on that first group, the predators of Africa. Before we start discussing specific legends and cases, I feel like I should bring up an argument that one of my sources, a paper by Professor Brian Siegel of Furman University, makes. He makes the case that these legends in Africa did not start out as merfolk legends. He argues that mermaids, the concept of a mermaid, arrived in Africa through a process known as cultural diffusion. Now, what is cultural diffusion, you may ask? That is a process where cultures that come into contact with each other end up exchanging knowledge, ideas, beliefs, words, phrases, and skills. Language-wise, a good example is the word okay, which has spread across dozens of languages and cultures like some sort of mimic infection. I can tell you from first-hand experience that you can use this word in Japan and in Bahrain and Australia, although I'll admit as an English-speaking country, Australia is not very surprising. And even people who don't speak English understand this word and what you mean by it right away. So that's a example of a word diffusing across cultures. If you want something more concrete, another example is the wheelbarrow, which we have as invented in China, and we can actually trace it spreading from culture to culture until it arrives in Europe. It's just one of those wild things. Apparently the wheelbarrow was only invented once, and everyone else just copied it from their neighbors. But let me get back to mermaids. So, his argument is that most of these creatures were originally shape-shifting serpents or spirits, but after picking up the concept of a mermaid, these legends were gradually shifted over to being half-human, half-fish creatures, or shapeshifters who had that form and could change into a full human or a full aquatic monster, or sometimes having a mermaid creature that had an association with a monstrous serpent. Is that what happened here with these mermaids that we're going to cover? I don't know. Because this isn't a process that leads a lot of hard evidence, especially in cultures that until very recently on a historical timeline mainly worked through oral tradition. So while Africa's a very old continent and people have lived here longer than anybody else, many of the native cultures of Africa never developed their own writing. So we don't have a unchanging record of their beliefs and legends, because oral transmission changes with every spoken rendition. That's one of the advantages of the written word, is once you write it down, it's there. Now, that doesn't mean that written tradition can't change either, because people will copy it, but it slows it down. And I think it's possible because this wouldn't have to be a recent shift. West Africa, for example, Maui, Ghana, Nigeria, they have been in sustained contact with European cultures for about 600 years now. That is plenty of time for them to pick up the idea of the mermaid from European traders, introduce that into their own culture, and have a shift in how they perceive things. That said, it's entirely possible that Africans came up with mermaids and merfolk on their own, and I mean, it's a human-fish hybrid. This isn't a huge leap. So I'm left feeling that there's not enough evidence to make a solid declaration either way, but this is something I wanted to bring up to you guys so that, food for thought, as it were. One more thing before I get into the predators of Africa. There is one merfolk creature that didn't fit either of these two groups, and I'm going to talk about them real briefly now. The Aya was only noted in a single source, a book called Across Wildest Africa, which was written by a European traveling across the Niger River region. I'm going to link to an online copy of the book below. I'll also include a page number for you, so if you want to just read the passage for yourself, knock yourself out. Just to kind of boil it down, the author describes it as sort of a human seal-like hybrid almost. So there's a human head, human hands, and on the ladies a well-developed chest, with the bottom part being more seal-like than fish-like, according to the writer. Although he never claims to see one, he just says he's repeating native descriptions. He of course also says that the natives have so many stories about these things, and he doesn't write a single one down. Thanks, dude. Seriously, if you're in contact with a native culture and they tell you a bunch of stories about a mythological creature or even a natural creature, please write down the stories. Don't just say they have stories, write down the stories. Future generations will thank you. What he does write about is how he came into the possession of the skin of an Aya, and how it's very thick and tough and elastic. And apparently people take chunks of this hide and whittle them into walking sticks, which seems to be a weird thing to make out of hide, but honestly, what do I know? I couldn't find anything else about this merfolk. So if you've heard of this creature before, or you know a story about them, or have another source, please sound off below in the comments. Thank you. Now, let's get on to what you're actually here for, the predator mermaids of Africa. Okay, so just a quick note here. For a lot of these terms, I could not find a pronunciation guide. I'm going to put the word up on the screen. If you know the correct pronunciation, or you can direct me to a resource, please let me know in the comments. but our first predatory mermaid that we're going to start with is the Chabo of the Mlambo people in modern-day Zambia. This creature is a merfolk that dwells in a group of lakes that is commonly believed to all be connected by underground tunnels. These lakes are usually listed as Lake Kashiba, Lake Muru, and Lake Karabi. And sometimes claims are made that these lakes are linked out to other bodies of water or even linked to the Atlantic Ocean. It's claimed these mermaids have the power to become invisible and will drag off unsuspecting victims to a watery doom. They will also use lures to bring people out to them, putting things like sleeping mats, baskets, and household goods just floating out in the water. So, someone hops on a boat to go out there and go, hey, why is there a sleeping mat in the middle of the lake? That's when they get you. And they just grab you while you're out in the middle of this lake and drag you off into the depths, and I assume you drown, although they might also eat you. Now, a really dark part of this myth is that some of the groups in Zambia believe that children who develop abnormally. One example I found was infants that have their upper teeth come out before their lower teeth may in fact grow into a Chabo, so their parents are encouraged to abandon these children in the wilderness, often on the side of these lakes. I don't know how I keep ending up with stories of children being abandoned, but it is starting to concern me a little bit, folks. On a slightly less dark note, there are also beliefs that link this to a different monster, a shape-shifting serpent with a fishtail called a fungui or Suoni. This is a truly massive creature that can cause disease, floods, and other calamities. One example that I've noted below in my sources, in the Roan Antelope Copper Mine in Lusana, it was believed that this creature was spreading sickness among the miners and causing cave-ins and other accidents. It got so bad that workers were refusing to come to work in the mine until an exorcism was performed. Some sources say that this creature guards the treasures of the Chabo, or even serves as a sort of bodyguard to the mermaid herself as she goes about her hunting. Another mermaid from the same region of Africa that's known for hunting is the Mamba Muntu. In some of my sources, she's presented as just another name for Mami Wata, but, in others, Mamba Muntu is always presented as a white-skinned woman with a fishy lower half, whereas Mami Wata is usually presented as having dark skin, as like a native African. Mambi Mutu is often depicted as blonde, wearing a lot of jewelry, and is especially known for gold watches and combs. And where Mambi Wata can be generous and helpful, Mamba Mutu usually likes to lure men away to torment and kill them. Although the story says if you can outwit her and steal one of her combs, you can use it to create a lot of wealth and power for yourself. Now, in all honesty, I can't help but feel that this story is a metaphor for something, like possibly dealing with a certain group that has exploited the region in the past, but has enriched a number of local individuals and groups. That might be my imagination, though, so, you tell me in the comments below, folks. So now we're going to head down to the country of South Africa, which has a tradition of a number of predatory mermaids as well. And we're going to start with the Mlambo, believed to inhabit the Metsent-Lavana River in Eastern Cape Province. I'm just going to apologize if I mangled the name of that river. That was my best shot, guys. Now, this mermaid may be another example of Professor Siegel's theory, because while it is depicted in some sources as a mermaid, in others, it's depicted as a massive creature 20 meters in length, with a long body, short legs, a long neck with a massive horse-like head at the end of that neck. It is believed to prey on people who come to the river alone, especially at night. It slays its victims, and then it eats their faces and their brains, which, yikes, right? Now, I'll be honest, between the crocodiles, the snakes, the big cats, and the hippos, especially the hippos, I don't think I'd willingly approach a river alone at night in Africa. I might be over-dramatizing the danger, though, I can admit that. I'm told there are Africans who watch videos of moose and black bear wandering into people's yards here in North America and are just utterly aghast and terrified by that. So it may be a case of the dangers you grew up with are the ones that register as the least dangerous to you, and the dangers other people have to deal with that you don't deal with just seem utterly terrifying. Also from South Africa, we have the mermaid of the Klein Karu. Now, the Karu is a semi-desert region in South Africa, while the Klein Karu is apparently an adjacent region that's more fertile. It's still not the kind of place you would expect to find a mermaid. This gets complicated by the existence of the Kango Caves, a large system of underground chambers with over 4 kilometers of mapped interconnecting chambers and counting that has legends of an underground river that is linked to the various rocky pools and streams throughout the area. Now, one thing I've learned is that humanity is very keen on the idea of underground waterways, and this time it looks like they might be right, because in 1972 an underground chamber full of water was discovered. So for once there is an underground waterway, or there might be. Now, getting back to the mermaids, or mermaid, some of my sources talk about this being a single mermaid, and others say it's a group, so I might switch back and forth. Just keep that in mind. The Klein Karu was home to a group of Khoisan people. Now, Khoisan is a term used for African natives of the region that don't speak a Bantu-derived language. Bantu-derived languages versus Khoisan and the different ethnic and linguistic groups of that region of Africa is a really deep and multi-branch sinkhole that we just don't have the time to plunge into, folks. I do encourage you to go ahead and take a look if you're interested, though. Some of these Khoisan people are called Bushmen, at least by other local groups. And the story goes that in 1875, a member of the Bushman group told a farmer named Mr. D. Balat that evil spirits dwelt in the rocky pools of a canyon called the Meringsput. I believe I got that right, so I'm going with that. And they took the form of dark-haired women with fishtails, and they would grab the unwary and drown them, so never go into the pools alone. Locals would also claim that the mermaid had the ability to summon floods and rain, or even cause droughts if she was angered, and that they could travel freely from pool to pool. Interestingly enough, the area also has rock paintings, thousands of years old, that appear to look like fish-tailed people. Now, this is disputed. Some say these aren't fish-tailed people, but are actually rock paintings of swallows, a bird that is culturally associated with rain in the area, and that the painting is meant to be a ritual to summon rain, which would be important in a dry and arid place like this region. And to be fair, when I look at these rock paintings, some of these could be winged creatures with long tails, like a swallow. Others look more like a fish-tailed creature with hands that are holding things. But I have to consider that I might be influenced by a bias here, because if you walk into a situation looking for mermaids, there's a good chance you're gonna see mermaids, even if there aren't any mermaids there. So the only thing I can think of that's really fair is for me to post pictures of the rock art in the video, and you tell me what you see, folks. Although I'm going to warn you, just keep in mind, you may also be influenced by your biases here. So, let's back off of any definitive declarations, right? The legend underwent a revival in 1996 after a large flood, with some claiming that the mermaid had been washed out to sea by said flood, others claiming no, the flood was evidence of the mermaid returning to the region after a long absence. There were a lot of sightings. There was even a local clairvoyant claiming they had contacted the mermaid psychically and that her name was Eporia. This led to some people claiming that the mermaid was actually the reincarnation of a flood victim somehow. This led to a surge of tourism in the area, so even today, the locals have worked to keep the story alive because tourism dollars are still dollars and you do what you can for the local economy. I'm not judging them for that, just for the record. Now, from what I can tell of my admittedly brief research into the area, the Kango Caves alone might be worth a trip out there. So if you're not afraid of enclosed spaces, because some of those passageways you'll have to squeeze through are like 20 inches wide, give it a go. And if you do, link us some of the pictures below in the comments. I think everyone would like to see first-hand experiences of the Kango Caves. Thank you. Now, this is where we're going to stop for this week. Next week, we're going to cover the mentor merfolk of Africa. That said, I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If so, please leave a like or a comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the Dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. Special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest supporter in that eternal struggle. Please feel free to examine my sources below, and if you think you can add to the list, I would be happy to see your additions in the comments. Next week, we're going to finish up Africa by looking at those mentor mermaids I mentioned, and I hope you join me then. However, until then, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.